Last time I made a video on the Irish rental market was about 2 years ago. I had loads of landlords reach out to me and tell me their horror stories. One guy, Paul from Kildare, said that he actually stopped going down to his local pub because of the amount of negative comments he got every time he went out, just because he was a landlord and he only had 2 properties at the time. He has since decided to sell up. And I received lots of very similar stories. And to think that this is happening, that people are selling up when rents are at a record high in Ireland, yet landlords are leaving in their thousands. This doesn't really make much sense, does it? Before I crack on with this video and cover the rental market in Ireland, why landlords are leaving and what are the options. For those who don't know me, my name is Shane Fleming. I've been involved in the real estate market for about 20 years. Over the last year or two, I've been involved in prop tech, and if anyone is interested in that, there will be some links in the description below. I do these videos as a kind of a hobby, so please show your support and subscribe to the channel if you want to know more about the property industry. It's a great way to learn about it, and also if you have any ideas on topics you want me to cover on this channel, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. So first off, we have to address this notion that landlords are not leaving the market. Anyone who claims landlords are not selling up is either misreading the stats or using convenient data points to suit their own narrative. Either way, either they're being ignorant or else they're just plain out lying to you. Let me just show you what I mean by this. Anyone in the media or the government who claims that landlords are not leaving and actually there's more landlords joining the market are relying on graphs from the RTB from 2023 to now, showing that the number of landlords have grown from about 96,000 up to about 104,000. But if you talk to any agent or any landlord in the market, they will tell you that landlords are leaving in their thousands. Top agents have come out to say that the vast majority of their sales over the last few years, up to nearly 50% of their sales, have been landlords exiting the market. So what actually makes sense here? Who's telling the truth? There are a few important elements to factor in. The RTB did update their website, their entire website, around 2022-23, causing a lot of confusion for landlords out there. They basically kicked all landlords off the system and forced them to re-register. Many landlords had issues re-registering. If they were non-residents and didn't have a PPS number, they couldn't register. If their building management company wasn't registered on the system, they couldn't register a tenant either. This caused lots of issues and many landlords got very frustrated trying to register. So what this really means is this increase from 2023 to now in terms of what we're seeing or what the stats are telling us are really just landlords who are coming back to getting registered, who have gone through the process of getting PPS numbers or getting their management company registered so they can actually register themselves. So a lot of it isn't new landlords, it's just old landlords actually just getting back on the system. But when you look further back at the RTB data and older reports that aren't readily available anymore, you will see a more telling story. Data from older RTB reports do show a very notable decline in the number of landlords. In 2016, there was approximately 175,000 landlords registered on the system. In 2020, that dropped to 165,000 landlords on the system. And in 2023, it dropped to about 100,000. That represents about a 70,000 drop in landlords from 2016 to 2023. That's a 40% drop in landlords registered on the system. And I suppose one notable thing that happened in 2016 was the introduction of the rental caps. And when you look at the tenancy numbers, that perhaps tells an even more concerning story. In 2016, there was a peak of tenancies registered on the system at about 320,000. In 2021, that declined to about 276,000. In 2022, it had dropped again to 246,000. This trend reflects a significant reduction in numbers over that time period. Over 70,000 tenants were lost on the system. There will be claims made that the stats are not all that reliable, and the RTB mixed in approved housing bodies and have split them out since. But no matter what way you kind of look at these stats, it all tells the same story, that the rental stock in terms of numbers has dropped, and the number of tenancies have dropped as well. And this is all coming at a point where the demand for rental units is at an all-time high, which makes it even more concerning for Ireland. How does this all make sense? Surely if rents are increasing and rental demand is increasing, more landlords should be willing to rent out their properties. But why isn't that happening? Well, there's a few reasons. The rental caps impact the value of an asset and aren't tied into inflation. Therefore, you could have a deflationary value in terms of your property. The RTB is not really set up to protect landlords, even though it's meant to, and many tenants actually abuse the system to the detriment of landlords. High taxes on the rent also hit the return that people can get from property investment at the moment. Property investment does require a lot of capital to be tied up, and ultimately an investor or property investor has to consider what the risk and return is of that capital being tied up, and can they get a better return elsewhere. Perhaps they could get a better return on a hands-off investment, and landlords have to consider that. There's no point in them considering, well, I bought a property 40 years ago for 10 grand and it's now worth 500 grand. Basically, they can't consider the 10 grand in terms of their return. They have to consider the 500,000 that it's now worth. And is it worth having 500,000 tied up in a property, or are they better off selling it and putting it into a safer, hands-off investment? And a true investor has to think this way, and that's what's happening in a lot of cases. People are deciding that they need to sell up because it's not worth the risk of holding on to these properties anymore because of the rental caps and the way the RTB is favouring tenants at the moment. The same has to be said, like if you bought Tesla shares 10 years ago, is it worth you still hanging on to them right now in terms of having all your value tied up in those shares? Or perhaps you think you might get a better return elsewhere over the next few years. Property investors think along the same lines as well. So the rental caps, the RTB, taxes are all making landlords considering exiting the market. And I suppose what makes the situation even worse for tenants, and many tenants, is they actually have the means to buy a property in terms of being mortgage approved, but there's nothing out there for them to buy, and therefore they get stuck in the rental market, and therefore there's not that churn, and it means new tenants trying to find places is getting harder and harder. So what could be done to help solve this or ease some of this burden a little bit? There's no silver bullet, but first off, the rental caps have to be removed. That would be one good starting point. Since the rental caps were introduced in 2016, the average national rent has increased by about 82%, so far in excess of the current 2% cap per annum. This equates to about a €900 increase in the last 8 years on a monthly rental basis. So therefore, the rental caps just aren't working. They don't work in Ireland, they haven't worked anywhere else, and they just have to go. There is many people calling for a tax reform for small landlords in terms of making it more viable to hold on to your properties and rent them out. But perhaps there could be some compromise here. Perhaps if tenants and landlords agree to a long-term rental deal at fixed prices, perhaps there could be some tax relief there. The RTB definitely needs to be reformed. Landlords just aren't protected, and as I said, tenants are abusing the system at the moment. And I suppose I am sick to death about talking about the planning system, but there definitely needs to be reform in the planning system. It needs to be sped up. There also needs to be alternatives for smaller build-to-rent schemes. At the moment, councils generally prefer to see 100 plus units be built when you're looking at a build-to-rent scheme. Perhaps there can be alternatives for smaller developers and smaller investors to tap into that market as well. There also is an opportunity to target vacant properties for the rental market. There could be a minimum standard, or perhaps the buildings could be converted to co-living if that is easy for them without too much red tape. Vacant buildings that are earmarked for kind of long-term development, generally landlords do not want to engage in leasing out the properties because of tenants' rights, and they don't want to have an issue when they actually come to developing the property that they're stuck trying to have to get rid of tenants, which delays construction. Perhaps there is a way for tenants to contract out of those rights, and if leases are signed up front and tenants are aware of the situation that this property is earmarked for development, that they're aware that they don't have rights. Obviously this could be abused by tenant or by landlords, so there has to be some safeguards put in place that this is agreed before the tenancy is put in place, and it's all agreed in terms of like the building actually does have future development potential. But there has to be some give and take in regards to rights and the ability for developers to actually build out development without the concern or risk factor of giving away tenancy rights that could impact their long-term development. Years ago when I was a student, there was such a thing as bedsits in most cities. You could rent them for about €500 a month. It wasn't the long-term or permanent solution for the majority of people, but it was a stepping stone. A bedsit allowed you to move out of your parents' home, but they've been banned, as well as co-living has been banned, and this has meant that there's no real affordable options for students or young professionals who want to move out of their family home. And this group of renters have either been stuck in their family home because there's no affordable option, or they've been forced into a higher end of the market which they just simply cannot afford or cannot do anything else with their life, and they get stuck in the rental market without actually being able to save for a deposit. There has to be some sort of alternative, modern alternative to the bedsits that are affordable for people, and there has to be something within the planning system that allows for this to be constructed. When I talk about the rental market, it's not about picking sides for landlords or tenants. It's about rebalancing the system to keep both renters and landlords in the game, because at the moment you can't have a renter if you don't have landlords, and the problem is thousands upon thousands of landlords are exiting the market, and therefore that is ultimately impacting the renter. It's like other markets where government have kind of got involved with over-regulation of childcare, obviously the housing market and the rental market. When you over-regulate, generally you end up hurting the end user because they get locked out of the system. If we keep going down the path we're on at the moment and nothing really changes, rents are going to still continue to rise. They'll stay high. Small landlords will vanish from the system. Larger funds will kind of dominate in some city locations, but they'll only really focus on major cities. And therefore, good luck trying to find a rental accommodation outside any major cities. So I do think small changes are needed to kind of counter that, to make sure there are small landlords still in the system, because without small landlords it's going to be next to impossible to rent outside major cities. I do hope with technology, better planning, some incentives to keep landlords in the game, there is a pathway forward to solving this problem. But if you're a renter, an investor, a landlord, let us know in the comments what you think about the current situation and what potential opportunities there are to solve it.